My name is Evelina March, and for most of my life, I've been the sister who faded quietly into the background. At least, that's the version my family prefers. The quiet one, the underachiever, the unmarried, the one who left home early and never really did much, as they like to phrase it. So when I walked into that banquet hall, silent, dressed in civilian black, no rank displayed, they barely looked up. My mother gave a brief nod, my father glanced past me, and my younger sister Corin let out a soft laugh. "You made it," she said with a smirk. "You still working at that records office or something?" The table chuckled politely. I smiled and said nothing. I wasn't there to prove anything. The event wasn't about me. It was Corin's military recognition banquet. She'd been promoted, and the family was beaming, ready to bask in her reflected glory. And then it happened. Just before the keynote speaker began, a tall, decorated officer entered the room. A hush fell as he scanned the tables, and then stopped cold when he saw me. He stepped forward, spine straightening, expression shifting into something unreadable, and in front of my entire family and Corin's unit, he raised his hand and saluted me. Not her, me. The room froze. So did Corin. I didn't say a word. I just returned the gesture. Because some reputations don't need defending. They announce themselves. Growing up in the March household meant two things. You followed the script, and you never questioned the lead actress, my younger sister, Corin. From the moment she could walk, Corin had a spotlight. She was bold, loud, effortlessly charming, the kind of child who corrected adults without blinking and still got praised for leadership potential. My parents lapped it up. "That one's going places," my dad would say, tousling her hair while I stood beside them, forgotten, clutching a book I had just finished in 2 hours. By high school, Corin was captain of 3 sports teams, class president, and already vocal about her dream of joining the military. My parents floated like helium balloons anytime she walked into the room. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, earned straight A's, and spent hours in the library reading about foreign policy and military strategy, subjects I loved but never spoke about at the dinner table. No one asked. When I turned 18, I left. No big send-off, no packed lunches or letters tucked in my suitcase. Just a tired, unspoken agreement between me and my parents. I wouldn't disrupt the narrative anymore. Corin went to a prestigious military academy, full scholarship of course. She sent home photos of her in uniform, medals pinned to her chest, grinning wide. My mother framed them all and created a gallery wall titled Service and Sacrifice. My name wasn't on it. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I too enlisted. Quietly. I didn't wear it like Corin. I joined under a different program, more technical, less visible. I didn't want applause. I wanted purpose. I remember one holiday years ago when I came home briefly for my father's birthday. I'd already completed a deployment overseas. Nothing dramatic, just a joint intelligence assignment, but I knew better than to bring it up. Corin was visiting too. She'd just made lieutenant. At dinner, when I mentioned I was working in Washington, she laughed and said, "Doing what? Filing papers for the DMV?" The whole table erupted. Even Dad chuckled. I smiled and nodded. Let them think whatever made them comfortable. That night, I drove back to my apartment outside D.C. and unpacked the encrypted laptop issued to me by the Pentagon. I worked on a report that would be handed directly to the Joint Chiefs by morning. But Corin was the one they saw, the one they quoted, the one who looked the part and played the role with flair. And maybe that's what stung the most. Not that they admired her, but that they had no interest in even wondering who I really was. Not once had my mother asked, "What do you actually do, Evelina?" Not once had my father said, "I'm proud of you." It was easier for them to believe I was the background character. But the funny thing about background characters, sometimes we're the ones holding the entire frame in place, and I didn't set out to disappear from my family. But over time, it just became easier to live a life where I didn't have to explain myself to people who were never listening. While Corin moved through the expected milestones, basic, officer candidate school, first station assignment, I carved out a different path. I went into military intelligence. Not the flashy kind you see in movies. Mine was the slow, methodical, mind-numbing sort that required fluency in 3 dialects, an iron memory, and a tolerance for gray areas. My work was invisible by design. I didn't wear ribbons or stripes. I didn't post on Facebook in uniform. What I did required silence, legally, morally, psychologically. But I was good at it, better than I expected. I started in signals intelligence, monitoring encrypted chatter, running decryption routines. It wasn't glamorous, but I saw patterns no one else saw. My team started winning small victories, intercepts that saved supply lines, reports that warned of ambushes before they happened. By my 30s, I had rotated through 5 postings and earned 2 commendations I couldn't speak about. Eventually, I was assigned to a think tank within the Department of Defense, advising on geopolitical threats and long-range strategic planning. My official title was deliberately vague: Civilian Defense Consultant. It was cleaner that way. I worked behind locked doors, sometimes beside generals, sometimes in conference rooms where my clearance outstripped the men in uniform beside me. I once rewrote a logistics protocol that saved over $18 million in projected annual loss. But when I told my mother I was in defense analytics, she responded, "So, like Excel?" There were moments I thought about correcting her. Moments I imagined walking into a family dinner and laying it all out, where I'd been, what I'd done, the things I'd seen that would keep her awake for weeks. But then I'd look at her, or my father, or Corrine, so utterly confident in their version of me, and I'd stop. It wasn't pride that kept me silent. It was detachment. I had stopped needing their approval, the same way you stop needing a toy, once you realize it never really worked. You move on, you grow, you outpace the old need. The last time I saw Corinne before the banquet, she was on leave. I was grabbing coffee in D.C., fresh from a classified meeting that had gone long. She saw me from across the shop, waved me down, and sat with me like we were equals, 2 sisters catching up. Within 5 minutes, she was recounting her last field exercise, boasting about how she corrected a commanding officer's call on a simulation. "He was so impressed," she said. "He told me I'd make major in no time." I nodded, offered a polite smile. Then she leaned in, voice lowered like she was letting me in on a secret. "You should really think about going back to school or something. I mean, you're smart. I'm sure you could work admin at a base somewhere." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just sipped my coffee and said, "Thanks, Corinne. I'll keep that in mind." She meant it as kindness. That was the worst part. She wasn't being cruel. She genuinely thought she was offering me a ladder upward, from the life she imagined I had, into one she believed was finally respectable. That moment sealed it for me. Not only had they never asked who I was, they'd built an entire fantasy of who I wasn't, and lived inside it like it was gospel. So when the invitation arrived months later, for her promotion banquet, I knew what I'd walk into. But I went anyway, not to prove anything, just to witness, for myself, how far someone could rise in their own world, while never noticing they were orbiting someone else entirely. The invitation came in the mail, tucked inside a floral envelope with gold embossing. I almost mistook it for a wedding announcement. "You are cordially invited to the promotion banquet honoring First Lieutenant Corinne March." It listed the venue, a formal banquet hall near the base where she was stationed, and noted the presence of several high-ranking officers. Dress code, formal civilian, or full-dress uniform. There was a handwritten note from my mother at the bottom. "If you attend, please don't draw attention. This is Corinne's moment." I stared at that line for a long time. It wasn't surprising. My parents had always been delicate about public image. When Corinne achieved something, it was a family celebration. When I did, it was a private milestone. We didn't talk about my promotions. We didn't hang certificates on the wall. My life to them was something best left off the record. I debated not going. It wasn't like anyone would miss me. But something about the handwriting, so measured, so familiar, tightened my chest. And maybe I was tired. Tired of being reduced to absence. Tired of letting their silence define me. So I booked a flight. I didn't pack my uniform. I brought a black dress, plain, long-sleeved, respectful. No insignia, no suggestion of affiliation. Just a guest. A shadow at the edge of the room. When I arrived at the hall, the place was buzzing. Men and women in military dress clustered at tables, their uniforms adorned with ribbons and pins, backs straight, postures trained. There were tables with family, others with commanding officers. I spotted my parents immediately, my father in his dated sports coat, my mother in a navy sheath dress that still had the department store tag hidden beneath her shawl. Corin stood at the center of it all, laughing with her colleagues. She looked good, confident, proud. She always had a stage presence. When she saw me approaching, something in her smile tightened. "You made it," she said, a little too loud. There was a pause. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "Everyone, this is my sister Evelina. She, works in admin, I think. Civilian side, right?" A couple of people nodded vaguely. One of the officers offered a tight smile. Someone else was already turning back to Corin for a story about fieldwork. I smiled and said nothing. My mother pulled out the chair beside her, but Corin intercepted with a quick, "Maybe over at the family table, Mom. I have some of my team sitting here." Her tone was light. Her eyes weren't. I walked to the far table, settled into a seat near the corner. The room was warm, the air stiff with aftershave and starch. Glasses clinked. Laughter bounced off the high ceilings. They weren't cruel, not directly. No one insulted me to my face, but there's a kind of silence that slices deeper than any insult, the kind that edits you out of your own bloodline. Corin was called up to speak. Her voice rang out clear and confident as she thanked her COs, her mentors, our parents. There was applause, toasts, smiles all around. I raised my glass and sipped quietly. No one asked me what I did. No one wondered why I looked familiar to two of the visiting officers who glanced my way with furrowed brows but didn't speak. They assumed I was nothing, a civilian, a paper pusher, a placeholder, and I let them. Because if there's anything I've learned working in intelligence, it's this. The less they see you coming, the harder they flinch when the truth arrives. After Corin's speech, the room shifted into soft celebration. Servers brought out dinner, steak or chicken, artfully plated, and I watched from my quiet corner as people leaned in close to catch up, to flatter, to gossip. Corin moved from table to table like a practiced diplomat. She knew how to balance praise and self-effacement, how to make every small anecdote sound like a war story. She was magnetic. My parents trailed behind her, glowing with pride, introducing themselves to anyone who would listen. Yes, we're her parents. Corin's always been driven. Knew she'd lead something since she was 5. No one mentioned me, which was fine. I didn't come for a mention. I came to remember why I had stopped inviting myself into this version of family. Somewhere between dessert and the final toast, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The chatter softened, the doors near the back opened, and a tall man entered. I recognized him instantly. Lieutenant General Halverson, 3-star, former head of military operations strategy. He'd been retired for just under a year, but still carried the weight of command in his presence. His walk was calm, calculated, no wasted motion. The room sensed him before they even saw him. Whispers started. Someone muttered, "Why is he here?" He scanned the room, shaking a few hands, exchanging brief words. But then, he paused. His eyes settled on me. Not a flicker of uncertainty, no hesitation. His expression changed only slightly, shoulders drawing back, chin lifting with familiarity. And then, in front of a room full of brass and family and egos. He walked toward me. Conversations dropped off mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates. Corin, halfway through another story at her table, turned her head. Lieutenant General Halverson stopped directly across from me, looked me square in the eye, and offered a slow, crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said, "it's an honor. I wasn't told you'd be attending." I rose instinctively, years of training reawakening in my spine. I returned the salute, clean and steady. "I wasn't sure I would, sir." He smiled, genuine. "Well, they're gain." Someone near him whispered, "Who is she?" Another voice, "Wait, March? Evelina March?" And then a ripple, a recognition, like water hitting glass. Because in circles they didn't talk about at family dinners, my name carried weight, not publicly, not in medals or press releases, but in operations that had quietly shifted entire outcomes. General Halverson extended his hand. Your work in Ops Delta saved lives. I never got to say thank you. I shook his hand. You just did. Behind him, Corin stood frozen. Her smile faltered. My parents blinked, unsure of what they were watching. A junior officer nearby, one who had laughed earlier at Corin's story, stood straighter, eyes flicking between us. You're... that March? I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the truth had arrived, not shouted, not forced, just recognized. And the room, so loud with certainty moments ago, now seemed very, very quiet. There are moments in life when the world doesn't erupt. It just pauses. No applause, no gasps, just a long, still silence that says everything. After General Halverson returned to his seat, the room didn't pick up where it left off. It couldn't. Something had shifted. The story everyone thought they knew had cracked, and the pieces no longer fit. Corin sat back in her chair, face unreadable. Her hands, usually animated, were now still in her lap. I caught her glance at our father, who offered a weak smile. Our mother looked down at her napkin, folding the corner with nervous precision. It wasn't embarrassment on their faces, it was confusion. The kind that comes when you realize you've misread someone for so long, the correction feels like a foreign language. People approached me, quietly, respectfully. Some shook my hand. Others just nodded. No one asked for specifics. They didn't need to. The general's salute had spoken louder than any resume ever could. Corin came over last. She stood beside my chair, wineglass in hand, and stared at me for a long time. You never said, she whispered. I looked up at her. You never asked. She blinked, as if that answer knocked something loose. For a second, I saw the girl she used to be, full of fire and ambition, but never cruel on purpose. Just unaware, untaught. I didn't know, she said, softer now. No, I replied. You didn't want to. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I just wanted her to see that silence doesn't always mean absence, that humility isn't invisibility, that sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who never needed to be seen at all. And for the first time in years, she didn't have a clever response. She just nodded, stepped back, and let the truth settle where it belonged. I left the banquet without ceremony. No fanfare, no final glances. Just the steady sound of my heels echoing against polished marble as I walked out. Not in defeat, not in triumph, just in clarity. I didn't need to stay for explanations or apologies. What needed to be seen had already unfolded, clean and sharp, like a truth slicing through fabric. The air outside was cold, but still. The kind of cold that clears the noise out of your head. I took a deep breath and let it anchor me. The night didn't ask anything from me, and for the first time in a long time, neither did anyone else. At home, I moved through the dark by instinct. No lights, no noise. Just silence, my oldest companion. I opened the hallway closet and reached behind the coats, to where my uniform waited in its garment bag. I hadn't touched it in years. I unzipped the bag slowly, like unsealing a memory. My dress blues were exactly as I left them. Sharp lines, ribbons in place. The nameplate reading, March. No rank needed. The name had earned enough weight on its own. That uniform had stood in rooms most people never imagined, across from men who gave orders with their eyes. It had carried my voice into places where lives were balanced on data, instinct, and timing measured in seconds. But I never brought it to family dinners. I never corrected Corin when she spoke over me, never interrupted my parents when they changed the subject. I let them keep their version of me, not because I believed it, but because it cost less to let them be wrong than to demand they grow. But that night, Halverson's salute did what years of silence could not. It shifted the axis. They didn't ask questions after. They didn't need to. They just sat with the truth. They had spent years narrating a story where I was missing. Now they'll spend the rest of their lives knowing I was never gone. I was just never where they expected me to be. I didn't need their validation. I never needed their permission, because I was never trying to take the spotlight. I was the reason the spotlight had a stage to stand on.